the outlook. What does it mean, or what is the purpose of learning Gemara? And it seems clear that there is a difference between the outlook of Rashi and the outlook of Rambam. Before I even begin with this, I'd also like to tell you that one thing in common over here is the picture. That both pictures that we're used to, one of Rashi and one of the Rambam, are false pictures. They're fake pictures. They are not true. We do not know how Rashi looked. Nobody knows today. Nobody living today knows how Rashi looked, and nobody living today knows how the Rambam look. Another thing that I like to say is that I have here, what I'm going to be using today is the sefer called Hamavo L'Sifrei Harambam, the introduction for the works of the Rambam. This is also, by the way, posted, and if you would like to get a PDF of that sefer, just email me at info@shazak.com. Once again, that's info@shazak.com. Let's begin with looking to see what the association of the Rambam and Rashi were, or actually when they lived. I could tell you right now, when they lived, Rashi lived before the Rambam. Rashi lived around 100 years before the Rambam. So, the difference between Rashi and the Rambam in the outlook to Gemara is the same difference between, as we said before, the difference between Sfard and Ashkenaz. The difference is that in Sfard, let's go back, in Sfard, in Spain we could also include that the Middle East, the outlook of Gemara is in order to reach a halacha, in order to get the verdict of the psak din, in order that we should know how to live as Jews. You have to have in mind that in those days, in the lives of the Rashi and Rambam, we really did not have any Shulchan Aruch, so to say. Of course, the Rambam wrote Mishnah Torah, but that was really the first thing that we have comprehensive code of Jewish law. But before that, there was no such thing. So therefore, when it comes to Gemara, as we explained before, the difference between Sfard and Ashkenaz, starting with the Rif Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, who was before the Rambam's teacher was Maimon, Maimon's teacher was the Rimigash, the Rimigash teacher was the Rif, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi. Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, the Rif, is just a summary of the Gemara, clearing all the Shakla V'Tarya, all the give and take, and coming straight to the halacha. So once again, the purpose of learning the Gemara is in order to reach a halacha. The Gemara often does not tell us, or most of the time does not tell us what the halacha is like. So therefore, you need really a good understanding of the Gemara in order to get the halacha. That is Sfard. In Ashkenaz, on the other hand, as we explained, it is the experience. It's not the reaching the halacha, which you could say is so important. In the words of the Maharal, which we mentioned before, it could be two different people are learning the Gemara. One person is really striving to understand the Gemara, reaches one particular conclusion regarding the halacha, and the other one reaches a different conclusion. In the eyes, says the Maharal, in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of Hashem Yisbarach, both are valid. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. What Hashem has nachas from, like we say regarding Karbanos, nachas ruach lefanei, shamarti v'nasa ritzaini, the nachas ruach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the fact that both toiled learning Hashem's Torah. V'gisa b'yayim v'layla. That is the idea of Ashkenaz. So the halacha itself is, so to say, not as important. So this Rabbi Yeshua Boyaz, what he decided to do was to put a reference that if you want to know where in halacha you could find it. So here, I'm telling you, this is Lamed Vav, which is a continuation of the page before where you had Lamed Hey. Goes back to the beginning of Brachas, we're in Daf Ches Amud Beis. So the beginning of the Gemara Brachas, you have Aleph. It starts with Aleph, and it keeps on going along. So this is what Rabbi Yeshua Abayas does. He tells you. It's in Rambam. Mem Yod Yud, Maimonides, whatever you want to call it. But it's Rambam, Perek Vav, Mechos Tefillah, Halacha, Aleph. Smag, Sefer Mitzvahs Gedolos, Reb Moshe Mikutzi from France. Essen, it's in Mitzvahs Essay. Yotes, you're going to find it over there. Tur Shulchan Aruch, Arachaim, Siman Tzadik, Sif Ches. Well, it says, well, either you could read it like this. I'm not sure which is correct. You could say Tur Shulchan Aruch because the name of Rabbi Yaakov, the son of the Rush, his Sefer, the Tur, is Tur Shulchan Aruch. But maybe he doesn't mention Shulchan Aruch over here. So maybe it's Tur Vish Shulchan Aruch. It's Tur and Shulchan Aruch. Well, they use the same categorization, so therefore it's Arachaim Siman Tzadik Seif Aleph. You could, or Seif Ches. You could find it over there. Okay, so that is Rabbi Yeshua Bayaz. Now, interesting. Often you have in Gemara a disagreement between Rav and Abaye, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel. So if you really want to know what the halacha is like, so you look into where the letter is, from even without looking into the Gemara itself. Look where the letter is, and you could find who we paskin like. So if there's a Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, if you look where the letter is from Rabbi Yeshua Bayaz, from Mesaris, not from Mesaris Hashas, Rabbi Yeshua Bayaz, from Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah. I flipped the page so it's on the left side. So look where that letter is, and if it's by, let's say, Rava and Abaya, if it's by the words of Rava, you know that halach is like Rava. If it's by the words of Abaya, you know that halach is like Abaya. So the question is, why, when I'm going through the yeshiva system, nobody told me this? That would have been fascinating. So I also shared with you my experience when I'm first learning Gemara was Eilo Metzias. So I'm spending so many days, so many hours and everything, Eilo Metzias, and I'm just getting antsy, and I want to know what's the halacha, and my Rebbe is like pushing it off aside, like it's not important what the halacha is. Even at the end, pretty frustrating experience to say the least. But this is all because the system, the chinuch system that we're in, is Ashkenaz dominated. So Ashkenaz means it's not important, the halacha. You want the halacha, later on you'll become a rabbi, later on you'll look in Shulchan Aruch, you'll find out the halacha. It's the experience, it's the root, it's the journey which is really important. So here we have on the page of the Gemara, dominated by Ashkenaz, Rashi and Tosfos, and that's what we have over here. I'm going to the next thing, and this was a very important introduction. And the next tool that I'm going to be using is the Bar Ilan tool. So I have it up over here. Show you something pretty fascinating. Let me close this. I'm just going to show you my journey, how I got there. And we're talking now about how Rashi looked at the Gemara and how the Rambam looked at the Gemara. So we're going to go, and I'll ask you a question. Think about it a little. I don't expect that you should have an answer to the question. We know that both Rashi and the Rambam were huge Talmidei Chachamim. That goes without saying. Now, Rashi lived 100 years before the Rambam. Rashi was in France, was in Germany. Now, Rashi wrote Pirush V'Kuntras, he wrote Kintrasim. These Kuntrasim, these pamphlets, were disseminated and ended up by a lot of people, became extremely, extremely popular. The question is, did the Rambam ever see Rashi? Not Rashi personally, but Rashi's Pirush, his explanation. Did Rashi ever see that? So, in order to answer the question, we have to look into the words of the Rambam. Well, I wrote the Sefer Hamavi L'Sifrei Rambam, did extensive research, and not one time is Rashi mentioned in the works of the Rambam. If I'm wrong, info@shazak.com. Let me know. Not one time. So the question is, was the Rambam aware of Rashi and he chose to ignore? Or perhaps the Rambam located, who was in Mitzrayim, even though he had a vast library, he never really saw Rashi. And that is controversial. And that is talked a lot about in scholarly works. But it's all speculation. The bottom line is that we don't know. I have my personal opinion, and I'll share with you my personal opinion. But before we get to my opinion, which take it or leave it, let's go and find out the flip side. Did Rashi and Taisvis, Rashi for sure never saw the works of the Rambam, but the Rashi's descendants, the Taisvis, who lived at the time of the Rambam and later, how about them? How did they regard Rambam, Mishnah Torah? It's so important. How could you even ignore it? So with the tool Bar Ilan that we have right now, what we're going to do is a search. Let's first of all, we're not going to search all databases. Let's choose our database. So I did choose, by the way, in Bar Ilan you have something called a catalog where you could find the sefer, you could search in that particular sefer. You want to have Taisvis, so actually I had to do that in order to find. So I just click over here. I got the green, and it's okay. Now I'm searching in Taisvis. So here you could see Rishonim, and I get over here Taisvis. I am searching amongst all the different mefarshim of the Gemara. These are classic mefarshim. You have. So I'm just going into Taisvis. There's no reason for me to include Rashi, because Rashi's not going to mention the Rambam. So here, let's take a look to see how many times does the Rambam come up in Taisvis. I press over here, and it comes up one time, Taisvis in Maseches Ksubas, Daf Pei Vav. I was pretty surprised when I saw that. I didn't expect that any Rambam will come up. However, as we could see, this is in parentheses and definitely added to Taisvis. I don't think Taisvis wrote it. There was one, and that's the reason why it's put in brackets here. Okay, because of V'chein Amad Debar, that's the way it is. Kiri, V'chein Rav Alphys, V'Rambam, V'Ritzah ben Avram, Nir Loik Rabbeinu Tam, V'emes Ki Nira Divrei Rabbeinu Tam. These words over here are so atypical. They're not typical whatsoever in Taisvis. This was definitely written not by the Balei Taisvis, but was written by someone else. I have no idea who that was. Regardless, so we see from here that not one time is Rambam mentioned in the entire Taisvis, and that is absolutely 100% incorrect, because he is mentioned. He is mentioned one time. And I have to be proud of myself that I'm not a big Gemara learner, I have to admit. However, I know that the Rambam is mentioned by the Balei Taisvis one time. And I can even tell you which daf. The Gemara says, Asei simanim l'Torah. You make signs for Torah. There are a couple places in the Gemara that I could impress people by saying, one time, and I always remember where that is. So the place is in Menachos, Daf Mem Beis. How do I know that? Because Menachos is mem, mem beis is beis mem, so it's 3 letters of the Rambam. So one time in the Gemara, mem stands for Menachos. Okay, it could stand perhaps for other Masechtas, but it's Menachos. For some reason I could remember Menachos. Daf mem beis, amid beis. So there is one time that the Rambam's mentioned. Now you may be a little confused. What's going on over here? Because I typed in Rambam. How am I going to find it? Well, actually, he's mentioned by a different name, which is Maimon. Okay, let me just go over here. Maybe they mentioned a different time. No. So there is a question also. How do you spell Maimon? Do you spell it with 1 yud or do you spell it with 2 yuds? Regardless, let's see if I'm right. Of course, yes. It is in Taisus Menachos, Daf Mem Beis, Amid Beis, where he does mention the Rambam. V'chein Pirush Moshe ben Maimon, and it speaks about mezuzah loy boi lishma. Okay, so and Tefillin yesh lahem bedika Pirush bekuntris avol svar mezuzah loy boi ben lishma v'chein Pirush harav Reb Moshe bar Maimon. Bottom of the page, the mezuzah loy boi lishma. Now, Tosfos was written by 300 Balei Tosfos. Which one exactly is this? I'm not sure. So it says one time in the entire Gemara that's mentioned the Rambam's name, and however, there is, after mentioning what the Rambam holds, the mezuzah loy boi lishma, if you look into Mishnah Torah, so right away, what's the comment? For loy pirush minale. He's missing something. It's missing the Rambam telling us, how does he know that? Now, with the words of loy pirush minale, we have a major complaint against the Rambam in his Mishnah Torah, that it's lacking the Gemara part of it. He's just telling you the halacha without too much additional, without sufficient, rather, information. So right away, that one place in Tosfos where he does mention, right away telling you something wrong. V'loi pirush minale. V'shema, and maybe mihacha. Now they're going to go into their speculation, which is very much like the Gemara itself does. So what we see from here is the Rambam ignored Rashi and Tosfos, and Tosfos ignored the Rambam. Tosfos was, at least some Balei Tosfos were aware of the Rambam Sefer, and they chose to ignore it, to not include it over here. Why is that? What's the difference? Now, we also know that the Rambam had an extensive library, a very extensive library. The Rambam talks about, when it comes to in Moreh Nevuchim, he talks about, I think this is a letter, he says, there's not one book, not Sefer, there's not one book of Avodah Zarah that I'm not familiar with. That's what the Rambam wrote. He had extensive. So lahavdil, if that's the case by Avodah Zarah books, I mean books that talk about Avodah Zarah. By the way, it's not that the Rambam was totally immersed in Avodah Zarah, but that was a major theme of the Rambam. In order to understand, to write halacha concerning Avodah Zarah, you had to be an expert in it. So that's what the Rambam writes. The Rambam had an extensive library. Just to give you in a nutshell, for sure he had. And for sure, at least in my opinion, I said back to my opinion, there's no doubt in my mind that the Rambam was aware of Pirush Rashi. He was aware of Pirush Tosfos, at least that was up to his particular time. This is all my opinion. However, the Rambam looked at it and he says, okay, but that's not my thing. I could understand the Gemara without Rashi. I have a deep understanding of Gemara. I don't need Rashi to help me understand the Gemara. the way that I approach Gemara is using the Gemara in order to reach halacha. I am doing all the work for you. You do not have to do it yourself. It's not the journey, it's the outcome. Very, very Sephardic. So that's why I think the Rambam did see Rashi. I don't think he focused much on Rashi, on Pirush Rashi. 450 Gemara Mefarish. Maybe Rashi uses different expressions also, but here we have, let's just click on this. So we have in the Mishnah, Val Taiva Mein Al Hara Taiva Meitiv Ubigmara Mefarish La. In the Gemara, we'll explain it. So what we see from here, from all these places, and it's usually on the Mishnah, Bigmara Mefarish La. It's almost exclusively on the Mishnah. Bigmara, in other words, you're learning the Mishnah, right away you're going to have a question. So Rashi's here to the rescue, and Rashi is telling us, Bigmara Mefarish. The Gemara is going to explain it. Okay? So, what Rashi is telling us is that a person is learning the Mishnah. Mishnah itself is not independent. Not independent whatsoever. In other words, if you're really, not if, in order to understand the Mishnah, you need to go to the Gemara. But Rashi also understands that he's learning with you, he's holding your hand, he's learning with you Gemara the first time. So he tells you, Bigmara Mefarish La. The Gemara is going to tell you, so hold your horses. I know you have a question over here, but Bigmara Mefarish La. Don't worry about it. The Gemara is going to explain that to you.